Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Plank. It's 813-367-0171. That's the number to join us here if you'd like to get on the phone lines. I know we have Joey out there that wants to talk a little bit about fantasy football. But first, before we do that, let me reset to you what we had going here from ESPN, from Outside the Lines, reporting that 4 sources that are close to Ray Rice have indicated to Outside the Lines that on, I believe it was the 16th of June, that Ray Rice did tell Roger Goodell that he punched his wife in that elevator in the Atlantic City casino.
Which contradicts what Goodell told CBS News earlier this week.
Said that, without question, it contradicts it. So there is some more example of what's putting Roger has 1 foot in the oil, so to speak, and the next one could be coming.
Every day we hear something new. We'll just wait and see what happens tomorrow.
Right, but I know a lot of people are really up for fantasy football. John plays it.
I do.
As I said last week, I try to get my life back, and I have succeeded, and then sometimes I wonder why I just didn't get back into fantasy. But anyway, I do have fantasies. But
you do?
I do.
We're not going to go into those, though.
But let's talk some fantasy football right now. I think we got to call Joey on the line. Is that right, Joey? Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, I'm Joey Graham. I'm Andrew Graham, 9 years old. We both play fantasy football, and we live in Atlanta, and we're huge Bucs fans.
Okay.
That's awesome.
And we have me and my brother have a few questions.
Okay, shoot.
I was wondering if I should start Andy Dalton or Nick Foles.
Oh, good question.
That is a good question. Now, I have the Bengals defense, so I'm kind of in the same situation where I'm thinking, okay, do I want to stick with the Bengals this week or go with Nick Foles in the Philadelphia side? I look at Andy Dalton. Did you ever have Andy Dalton on your team?
No, I never had Andy, but I've had I had the Brady's and then when he got hurt, then I had you wouldn't even want to know. You wouldn't even know these guys. They're not even in the league anymore. But listen, let me ask you something. Who's at home? Who's at home in this game?
Who's at home in your game?
Who's at home?
I don't know.
Take a look at the schedule because I don't have it handy here. But if I were to take
well, it's the Falcons. Falcons are playing the Bengals, and this is what I was bringing up because I have the. Okay.
And look at how many points New Orleans scored. And Andy Dalton's a pretty good quarterback.
Yeah, they're going up against a interesting defense, Atlanta. See, I almost tend to take Andy Dalton, even though he's been a little inconsistent over the last few seasons. Towards the end of the year, had a decent game last.
Now is that in Atlanta?
In Cincinnati.
No, I see. I'll take Dalton. I'd take Dalton, and because I do see, and I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but I do know that the NFC South has a difficult time trying to beat AFC teams. I know the Buccaneers do, Atlanta does.
It goes across the board,
except for maybe New Orleans. But
Nick Foles is going up against a Washington defense at home, and the Eagles did have some problems getting on the board early against Jacksonville of all teams, but then they score 30-some-odd points unanswered.
But Jacksonville played to their potential in the second half.
That's true, but now they're playing a Redskins team.
I take Andy Dalton, guys. I take Andy Dalton there.
Thank you.
Is that it?
No.
Okay, go ahead. What do you got?
I have Andrew Luck and Russell Wilson, and I was wondering if I should start Andrew Luck or Russell Wilson. I was going to do Andrew Luck, but he didn't do so well. He threw 2 interceptions last week.
Well, one thing about Andrew Luck is that he rarely has 2 bad games in a row. So I would keep that in mind.
Yeah, you're right. He doesn't.
He does not have 2 bad games in a row. Russell Wilson, well, you're playing with the quarterback who is on the best football team in the National Football League. You count on the defense of Seattle shortening the field for him and his offense. The question is whether or not it's going to be Marshawn Lynch running the football in, or whether or not it's going to be Russell Wilson throwing the football. I think if you had my druthers, I'd take Andrew Luck because I think he'll be chucking it more than Wilson will be.
Yeah, I would have to agree on that one too. Okay. Seattle's at San Diego too, and San Diego played pretty well last week.
Right. Hey guys, I'll tell you what. Why don't you hang on right there? We'll come right back to you because I want to get to Matt McGuire right now, who's our fantasy guru.
Yeah, and he'll give you your top 3 players on who to look for, who to possibly pick up before, well, a couple minutes before week 2 begins here on Thursday.
Yeah, and which is amazing. This is his first time out in public.
Yeah.
Here he is.
Hello everyone, it's time again to talk about fantasy football. Week 1's in the books, and even if you lost last week, don't panic. Every year, owners around the country make mistakes by picking up guys that had big weeks and can't necessarily maintain it, and dropping somebody that they should have held on to. I think back to last year with Victor Cruz. In week 1, he had 118 yards and 3 touchdown catches. For the rest of the entire season, he only had 1 more touchdown. Now, I'm not saying everybody who came out and had a big week in week 1 won't be able to maintain that. I'm just saying be a little bit more cautious about who you drop if you are going to add somebody. Now, here's 3 guys that you're going to want to keep an eye on and maybe consider adding if they're available. The first guy we're going to talk about is Malcolm Floyd. He had a neck injury last year, but he's back and he looks healthy. His quarterback is Phillip Rivers, and Rivers threw for almost 4,500 yards last year and 32 touchdowns. With Floyd back in the starting lineup, it's safe to say that he'll capitalize on some of those touchdown passes. Now, he did that in week 1, so I think he'll be able to continue that production as the year goes on. The next guy on the list is Justin Forsett. Forsett entered the season number 3 on the Ravens depth chart. We all know what happened to Ray Rice, and the guy who was supposed to back up Ray Rice was Bernard Pierce. Pierce had 6 carries for 14 yards in week 1 before he fumbled and was benched for the remainder of the game. Forsett came in and had 70 yards on 11 carries with a touchdown. Now, Forsett's a smaller back, so it'll be interesting to see if he can maintain that workload throughout the season. But he has the trust of the coaching staff, and in fact, his offensive coordinator, Gary Kubiak, was the head coach in Houston where Forsett played 2 years ago. The next guy on the list is Ahmad Bradshaw, and as much as the Colts don't want to admit it, it looks like Trent Richardson might not work out. He was a first-round pick a few years ago by the Cleveland Browns, and the Browns traded him to the Colts last year for their first-round pick. But when you look at Richardson's career numbers of 3.3 yards per carry, it's not really that productive. When you looked at Ahmad Bradshaw last week, when he entered the game, there was a noticeable spark in the Colts offense. Now, we talked about guys who come out with big weeks in week 1, and be a little bit cautious whether you go jump and adding them real quick. There's 2 guys that I want to talk about that I'm not quite sold on yet. The first one is Allen Hurns. He had fantasy owners last week scratching their heads saying, Allen who? He came out and had a great week in week 1. He had 110 yards and 2 touchdowns. That would have been the highest performing wide receiver in week 1 if it wasn't for some guy named Megatron. Now, the reason I'm not sold on Hurns is one word: Jacksonville. They're not known to light up the scoreboard, and they had their number 1 wide receiver, Cecil Shorts, out with an injury last week. When Shorts comes back, and with the inconsistent passing game in Jacksonville, I'd be surprised if Hurns can match that week 1 performance. The next guy on the list is Cordell Patterson. Now, he's arguably one of the fastest players in the NFL, and definitely one of the most exciting when he has the ball in his hands. People were really excited about his week 1 performance with 102 yards rushing and a touchdown. The problem is, though, he's a wide receiver and not a running back. When you look at his numbers as a wide receiver last week, 3 catches for 26 yards. What I'm not sold on is a guy as physically talented as he is should be putting up bigger numbers. I don't know if he has a hard time getting open or what the problem is, but I'd like to wait and see how he's going to adapt as the coverage looks to hone in on him a little bit more. There are 3 key fantasy injuries last week that I want to highlight. The first being Ben Tate. He's the starting running back for the Cleveland Browns, and he went out with a leg injury after just 6 carries. The Browns aren't saying a whole lot right now, but when you look at the performance of the rookies that came in behind him, Terrence West and Isaiah Crowell, they played great. So even if Tate does come back and he's healthy, I'm worried about every fantasy owner's worst nightmare: running back by committee. The next guy that I want to talk about is Jordan Reed. I highlighted him last week as a potential breakout player if he could stay healthy. Well, 7 plays into the 2014 season, and it's obvious he can't stay healthy. He's got a hamstring injury that may keep him out for a couple of weeks. And the last guy is Doug Martin. This one hits a little close to home. He had 9 yards and 9 carries before injuring his leg. He missed most of last year with a shoulder injury. Now, Lovie Smith is saying the injury is minor, so we'll see if he can get back on track for week 2. Speaking of the Bucs, there was a lot of talk about the offense last week, and they just looked lost for 3 quarters. But that's bound to happen. And remember, rule number 1 in fantasy: don't panic. We had a new system, a new quarterback, and a great defensive opponent. Now, the Bucs redesigned their jerseys last offseason, and I don't think the grass stains on the back of McCown's were part of the design. So the offensive line needs to give McCown more protection if we're going to be effective offensively. It doesn't get any easier this week with the Rams coming to town. They were 3rd in the NFL last year with 53 sacks. So let's see if that offensive line can give McCown some time and we can get some pass plays downfield. That's all I've got for week 2. Thanks for watching. I'm Matt McGuire from the Bucs ship here at Raymond James Stadium.
And we second a motion on the offensive line, giving one Josh McCown some time, huh?
Yeah, it's getting annoying talking about the line. I hope they actually fixed it, because I don't know if you and I can keep talking about it.
I know. Well, I got some picks for this week, and the first game, of course, is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Rams. I'm going to take the Bucs in that one. The second game, well, this is kind of like a gimme. Kansas City at Denver. I got to be nuts not to take Denver.
Right.
You got it favored by 115. And then you got Detroit and Carolina. This is my people are saying, well, wait a minute now. Cam Newton's quarterback.
See, I disagree with you on this one.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. But I'm taking the Motown.
I think
Take 'em out.
Detroit sometimes has problems on the road, and I think Cam Newton could just,
All right.
get a couple rushing touchdowns there and
Gotcha.
see what happens.
Well, the keys to the game right now for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, number one, folks, they got to eliminate turnovers. Number two, pressure from the front four. And number three, they have got to win those third down battles. Those are the three keys to the game, I think, for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming up against the Rams on Sunday. But, I mean, this it's been a fun evening right here. This hour is just pretty much blown by.
Blown by, yeah.
And you probably want to, what the world is this? What are we, a couple of nuts with some bobbleheads
Well,
sitting in front
this
of
is
us?
the Derek Brooks bobblehead that will be given out to every fan in attendance at the Bucs game this weekend. Of course, they're honoring Derek Brooks at halftime there at Raymond James Stadium. And believe it or not, this is the first time a Buccaneer since 2008, Mike Allstott
yeah.
had a bobblehead. So
It's amazing.
It's a collector's item. So
Is that
if you're
really a
going to
likeness of him? 55 is good.
right, I think that's the only thing
55
they
is good.
probably got right on that.
But that's cool. I mean, Derek deserves it. The Hall of Famer and one of the nicest guys. And if there's somebody that you would want your son to emulate, Derek Brooks would definitely be one of those
and
guys.
remember, they'll be inducting him in the Ring of Honor at Raymond James Stadium at halftime. So,
all right, we want to thank all of you folks for joining us here on week 2 of The Plank that's presented by Jeep. We want to thank all the callers, especially those two youngins that called us here.
How about that?
Joey and Andrew, is that what it was? And they were calling from Atlanta. So
good to see Bucs fans in Falcon
it
territory.
is. So spread
right?
the word, Joey and Andrew, to all your good friends in Atlanta, because if I'm not mistaken, 1 week from Thursday, the following
night.
Thursday, who
Thursday
they
night.
play? That would be ATL, wouldn't it?
The
All
Dirty
right.
Birds, the Falcons.
Right. Once again, folks, thanks a lot for joining us. You see it right there on the screen. Keep that in mind. You can hook up with us on the show any of those ways. All right. So until next Thursday here on The Plank, I'm Tom Korun for John Sabol. Have yourself a great evening and enjoy your weekend.
Go Bucs.